Hey guys, this is Ryan.
And this is Rob.
You're listening to Frontier.
So those of you who joined us last time, you got to hear our first episode with John Kammerer, a sound producer, designer from out from Seattle. John's worked with some pretty high magnitude groups. It was really cool to hear to hear a lot of answers to the questions that we had for him. Most of what we said first time was about his professional life right now, and we're going to get into like maybe more so his thoughts on applications for electronics, like process of putting electronics into programs and such things. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing great. It is good to be back.
Yeah, it is so ironic because it's literally just been 3 minutes since we recorded last week's episode. So it was a long walk from the kitchen, let me tell you.
I'm going to be honest. During this whole coronavirus stay-at-home thing, time is passing a bit differently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I didn't realize my fiance and I had like a 2-person at home little dance night a while ago. And that was a lot of fun. Like that was kind of towards the beginning of it. And we just realized the other day that a month had passed since that. And we were like, wow, like what? It felt like 2 weeks, and all of a sudden an entire month was gone. And we were like, wow, this is weird. This is a whole weird thing.
Yeah. I don't know about you. I feel like I have no issue staying at home for this long on end and occupying myself, honestly.
Yeah, same. This is what I do all the time anyway. I'm sitting in my workspace right now. I'm always here. So it's been easier for me. She's working from home right now. She normally works just down the street pretty much at she designs engagement rings, actually, like custom engagement rings. And so she's been working from home and doing that. And it's definitely been a bit of a change for her. But for me, it's just like business as usual, more or less. trying to put more emphasis on the online stuff, but that's about the only change.
I feel like when you had to propose, that had to be like a very like tightrope thing to walk. You're like, okay, do I design my own ring? Does she design her own ring? Like, what?
It's funny. Everyone, when I tell them what she does, the first thing they do is they're like, oh, that's gonna be tough for you. Like, are you kidding me? It's gonna be the easiest thing for me. She told me right up front that she was gonna design her own ring, so I didn't have to worry about it. Not to mention that she gets all kinds of crazy employee discounts for everything. So I proposed with her next favorite thing, which would be cookies, and I tried to decorate them, one like a ring, and I definitely think that like a 3-year-old would have done a better job. I know a 3-year-old would have done a better job. Well, okay, I made 2 attempts. The first one, I tried to actually draw out her ring that she designed, because she had already been showing me her like ring designs before I proposed because we knew it was going to be happening,
Okay.
kind of. But we knew it was going to be happening because I went and told her parents. Then her mom spilled the beans to her about it.
Oh,
I was too excited. I wasn't trying to get it. Was fine. I wasn't trying to keep it too secret or anything, But like she kind of knew it was already going to be happening. I thought that was really funny. Actually, it kind of like took a little pressure off me anyway. But so she was designing her ring, and I tried to like actually make it on a cookie, and it ended up looking like Yoda. So I'm serious. It looked like Yoda. It was like really bad. So I gave up. Then I tried to just make a simple like yellow ring with like a diamond in white, and oh my god, that was so bad too. So I still used it. It was fine. It went over very well. Then I took her out to a nice dinner and a bar and and like a nice like cocktail lounge, and we kind of had like a private room to ourselves, and it was a really good one. So
that's cool.
The thought that matters.
It is. Yeah, exactly.
Well, so unlike John's baking, John's sounds are not cookie cutter. They are all designed pretty well and like pretty really just like you can tell so much thought and care goes into it. It's if you guys aren't watching our YouTube version, you can see John in his studio where he's like just surrounded by synthesizers and controllers and stuff. And like for the while watching a couple of his advertisement videos or some of his tutorials, I wondered like, does his studio even have a door? Does he just like appear and does he sleep in this room and like live here? Because there's just so much other stuff in there. The door is just so barely noticeable. But yeah, it's truly a professional that surrounds himself with his work. So getting into it, John, as we're going to start probing your brain here, why do you think, in your opinion, why are electronics an important element to the marching arts?
That is a good question. Well, I mean, if they're undeniably important. It's just like the question is why? Like, why are they important? And there's kind of two thoughts here. One is because, uh, and this is the one that's less important to me. Okay, this is the one that's less important to me because everyone's doing it, right? I mean, it becomes the same the thing. Like the playing field has been changed, right? And if you aren't doing electronics with your band, then it could possibly be viewed as though you don't want to compete in the same way. I'm not saying that's true. I'm not saying that that's how I think about it at all. I don't think that, but I do think that sometimes, especially now that I mean, like like Texas has added the whole like electronics element to their judging sheets and stuff over the past year. Um, it kind of is becoming a necessity. Everyone's doing it. Not everyone. Almost like a lot of bands are doing it. And if you aren't doing it, then you might not be seen as someone as a group that is wanting to compete on the same level. Like I said, whether it's true or not doesn't matter. It's just kind of it's the thought, you know. So that's the one. Like I said, that's the why that matters less to me. The why that I'm really all about is because it makes everything sound so much cooler. Using and not to mention, you can actually hear everything, right?
Yeah,
When it's done well, you can hear the front ensemble, you can hear the soloists, you can hear the band if you're doing field miking, I mean everything. You can actually hear.
woodwinds,
What's that?
woodwinds.
The woodwinds. Yeah, you can have
Mhm.
um one of the groups I worked with last year, Marcus, they had was it last year or the year before? I don't know, one of the past years with Marcus, they had a tenor recorder on the field. That's not a loud instrument. All
Yeah,
right, that is not a loud instrument. But the electronics make it possible to do these sorts of things. Otherwise, it'd be someone out there just standing while the band's not doing much and like playing a recorder that no one can hear, right? So it makes everything sound cooler. It makes everything sound. You can hear it, you know. And another reason why it's important to use electronics is because it helps to convey the story right from the start with your pre-show, right? That sets the scene. I mean, and it helps distract from the whole like setup unless you have some structured setup type thing going on, right? Your pre-show sets the scene for the entire storyline. And most competitive groups have a storyline, whether it's very obvious or very esoteric, but generally it's not just a collection of like the top hits from the 80s. It's usually a designed, thought out story from start to finish. So and even if it is the top hits from the 80s, there's a through line, right? There's a pageantry through line to it, and the electronics help with that. So
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I will say on your website, John, you have a audio example where it goes from just the MIDI file with no electronic sounds or anything, and then the exact same MIDI file with the electronic sounds,
mhm.
and it's a huge stark contrast just in terms of not even, as you said, storyline, but just what energy that brings to an audience member and somebody observing. It fills out everything so much more.
It does. It gives it this kind of cinematic quality that I really like, and I use that word a lot when I talk about this cinematic, because you have 7 or 8 minutes out there or so. Like you have a short amount of time to convince an entire crowd of this and like, form of entertainment. I mean, this is entertainment. Let's not get us wrong. I mean, sure, we're competing, sure, it's important, and we're being judged and all these things, but fundamentally, this is music. This is entertainment. This is something that needs to be enjoyed, right? And adding electronics to the mix increases the enjoyment. And I can't tell you how many times I've shown up at a school and been like, hey, here's the electronics. And they sit down and play it for the kids the first time. And their faces are just like, sorry, for those of you who aren't on the, I made a big wow face. But yeah, the kids
Yeah.
really like it too, um, almost across the board. Like the kids get really, really, really excited when they finally hear their show with the electronics added in. And in the last episode, I mentioned how there needs to be oftentimes like not a continual but a fairly constant element of electronics, because if you're just going to use one big effect, then that's going to stand out from a way that will take people out of the band, right? It'll take people out of it entirely. I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting in the stands and I've heard like the sound effect for the show, and it's just like, what, where did that come from, like that was just like from the speakers in the front, and it just like was obviously from the speakers in the front, and I hadn't heard that being used until that point, and it just kind of really, really took me out of the stage of everything. So that before and after file that I put up there, that was to show that sure, like I put big moments in. I'll put a big one in there. The show's going to end with a bang. There's going to be a pre-show, but underneath it all is this really subtle element of electronics that is um, just kind of burbling along underneath, even if it's not prominent, right? It's not, I think that so often people think of the sound design as being something to be focused on. But in the same way that the harmony, is not necessarily the focus, but the melody, the electronics don't always have to be in the forefront. They can be in the background and just providing a little bit of like, uh, don't notice it there, but miss it if it's not type of deal. You know what I mean? So like if I were to take, that's probably like 75% of the electronics that I put into a show is stuff that you don't necessarily focus on. It's not the focal point of the moment, but if it wasn't there, it'd be missing something, right? That's my approach to this whole thing. So yeah, I think that's an important reason to use it. So yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah,
That's a great answer.
yeah, and I like that you said that you kind of bake the electronics in through the whole show because when I first started working with bands and the electronics were starting to get bigger, as I'm sure Rob and you can attest to, there were groups and there still are groups that are like, oh, we got to throw the sound effect in after the fact of the whole show being designed, where it's almost like, oh, well, why do you need that bass drop? Why is that bass drop there? You're like, well, we need a sound.
Yeah. And that still is actually the workflow generally, is that like I am oftentimes, whether it's true or not, I feel as though I'm kind of viewed as like the cherry on top. And I mean, like, you're still going to really enjoy the sundae if the cherry's not there, right? But it'll
Mhm.
be a little nicer with the cherry. So I still kind of view myself like, or not, I don't view myself this way, but I can kind of tell, like, I'm the last one to be contacted a lot of times. Um, and I get the completed show. But there's a lot of designers that I work with now on multiple shows. I really like, there's a bunch of people, like I probably like more than half my gigs are with a few designers that now write their music knowing what I can do with it and what I will do with it. So they'll leave spots for me to put something that makes sense, or they'll write the music in a way where what I put in there locks in and fits to it. So it's not just like slapped on top, which does happen. And
Mhm.
that's how I came up. That's how I learned, so I can make that work just fine. But but when I get to work with those people that leave room for me and kind of work with me a little bit, that's just really nice. I really, really enjoy that. So
Yeah, I think that also makes for an easier time making it more cinematic when it can be at part of the process versus added in to the process. And like you said, it doesn't always stick out super huge if it's added in afterwards, but
mhm.
if it can be there from the beginning, I think it works its way in better.
It does, yeah. And I mean, like a lot of the big, like BD is probably one of the best. I really like BD's electronics, like in general, Blue Devils electronics. I think that they're fantastic. Um, you know, Coats too as well. Like those two are probably like top of the game with their electronics, and you can tell that it's you can tell that it was thought of at the along the process. It wasn't added in after, right? Things were built around the electronic sound effects. Um, the famous tilt effect, from that year. That was obviously built into it, and it was thought of early on and not later. I could be wrong. I mean, I wasn't part of that process. Maybe they did decide to throw it in at the end and it just worked really well, but it doesn't sound like it to me. If it was, I mean, if it was added in afterwards, great job, but I don't think so. So
Yeah.
Okay, so if say a band director has decided to take that step into the electronic world, you know, probably little knowledge, no experience, probably very little equipment. What do you suggest a band director, program designer, whatever, where they start with?
um, get the basics first. Get your basics right, because there's so many times that I see some groups that don't want to do things like get the right mixer or upgrade their speakers, and they said they want to keep adding on to like the sound, like the laptops, the synthesizers, samplers, microphones, things like that. But like fundamentally, the first thing you need to do is get speakers that are good, right? That is an investment. If you have tiny little speakers that are not good quality or not matching, or I've seen it all, or broken, I've seen that a lot, and you're just not upgrading them, but you're buying other stuff. That's just nothing you put through is going to sound good anyway. So that's the first thing. A good like fundamental base, which would be the mixer, the sound, the speakers. Of course, the microphones are important too, right? I think I may have said that earlier as though it was an extra, but it's not. It's pretty important. You need your microphones. Um, from that point, after you have all that set up, the next thing I would do, this is the next most important thing I would do. If you have a mixer and you have speakers and you have your whole front ensemble mic'd up, the next thing you need to do is get a laptop and get one of these DAWs, Ableton or Mainstage, like I talked about in the last episode. Use a laptop rather than using hardware equipment, because it is so much more cost effective and it is so much higher quality sounding. These Yamaha motif synthesizers that weigh like 5 million pounds and make like three sounds good. Uh, I can't deal with them. They're so hard to use, and it takes so much effort to get them to sound good that it's not even worth. I mean, no one has that time in rehearsal, and I don't. I mean, I know a lot of percussion directors are really, really stretched for time anyway. The last thing they want to do is spend an hour after every day trying to program a new synth sound in or something. So the next thing that I would get is a laptop, an audio interface, and I prefer Ableton, but Mainstage would work too. That's basically it. And at that point, you'd be good to go, because you can use that laptop to manage your samples. You can use it to manage your synthesizers. They can all run off the same laptop. If you have the luxury of being able to buy multiple laptops, then you can get one for the samples and get one for the synthesizers and keep that separate. I like that workflow, but you don't have to, you know. Um, and I know there's a lot of people that are a bit nervous about including a laptop as though it might fail. They seem to think that like a laptop is just going to fail. Um, and I mean, yeah, it happens. But I've also had jacks out of the back of hardware synthesizers go out on me. The Yamaha DTX Multi 12s. That is one of the most I hate. They're okay. They're fine, but oh my god, that power connection, if you look at it wrong, it's gonna break. You know, it's just so. Oh, and not to mention the fact that a stereo sample only lasts. You can only have a 22-second stereo sample.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you might think, well, that's fine. I mean, it makes sense. It's a drum pad, right? What drum sounds last for 22 seconds? But when you're trying to use it as your main sampler, I don't know about other sound designers, but a lot of my samples last for longer than 22 seconds sometimes, you just, it's so inflexible. And I've had to do so many somersaults in the past to kind of get past that, like splitting a sample that lasts for a minute, like a pre-show. They have no other way of playing the pre-show, or they don't want to do it any other way except put on the DCX. So I have to take this 2-minute thing and split it up across multiple pads and do these crossfades and have the kids hit things at the right time so it crossfades smoothly. And it's just a nightmare. Whereas, if you have a laptop, it's just like press a button, let it play, let it do its thing. Uh, Not to mention the fact that when you have a laptop, you can screen share with it, and you can sit in the stands or stand back a ways and control that laptop from your computer a distance away, so you get a better sound. You can hear everything a lot better. You can make the changes right then instead of having to run back and forth. Spent so many years of my life running back and forth. It's the worst. I use the screen share thing all the time. So yeah, that's basically it. And then once you get your laptop, once you get your synths going, once you have your audio interface, your mixer, good speakers, all the microphones set up, then you can start looking into things like shotgun mics, then you can start miking your field. Then you can start getting things like digital stage boxes and all of the stuff that's going to make your life easier. But I see people do things out of order sometimes, and there's a better way, So just make sure you got the fundamentals first, then you can move on from that point. And actually, on my website, I have in the blog section, there's a post in there called John's 2020 Gear Guide or something, and I've listed every piece of gear that you might need to get that I recommend. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out. I wrote that up because I found myself spending a lot of time writing the same email to people over and over and over again, and so now I just refer them to that.
Can you talk a little bit about budgeting? I know sometimes it's hard as like the designer to tell a director how to best set their budget, but one of the things, I just took over a new program over the last year, talking about the electronics being an investment, and investing in the right gear instead of whatever gear you can get your hands on, because with so many wind instruments, like a really good player can make a little bit of a lower quality instrument sound better,
Right.
but lower quality electronics will not make your sounds better. They will make them worse in
Yeah.
most cases.
Yeah.
So
And
can you talk a little bit about that?
yeah, for sure. And what that really does come down to, as far as the sound goes, that's all speakers, right? For the most part, unless your sound designer isn't any good. But then it's all it's all speakers basically. The speakers have to be good, and I have seen some crazy systems being used, and by that I don't mean crazy in the like high end way. I mean crazy in the like uh karaoke speakers being used before. I've seen it. All right. It's kind of wild. So it is an investment. You should get good speakers. You should get I like powered speakers. I like using powered speakers, but there's some very good unpowered speakers. I forget the model, but Yamaha recently came out with some very good unpowered speakers. So I prefer powered just because you don't have to. That's just what I like. So they typically powered speakers are going to sound a little bit better than unpowered because the amps are so finely tuned for the speaker. The amps are built in. But so that's where it sounding good is related to the investment part of it. But what the main thing is functionality. So investing in cheap gear is gonna make your life a living hell down the road. It's just gonna make everything harder for you, and you're just gonna have to buy more gear in the future to fix that problem. Whereas if you start off by buying the right stuff, you can grow into it a little more. Um, don't buy the 8-channel mixer when you only need 8 channels, right? Buy a 16-channel one. Give yourself some room to grow. Buy a 32-channel one. You never know. It's not like if you buy a 32-channel mixer, like digital mixer right now, it's not like that's going to sound worse a decade from now. You know, it's still going to be a
Mhm.
really nice functional piece of gear if you take care of it, and it's going to sound just fine. So it really is. It really, like, I'd say that 20% of it is how it's going to sound, and 80% of it is how easy it's going to be for you to use in time. You know,
Mhm.
so yeah, it's important.
And to go along with the functionality, what about for the band director that doesn't know the difference between like digital mixers versus analog mixers, and why the digital mixer might be worth spending that extra couple bucks on.
Yeah, well, a digital mixer just allows for all kinds of like digital routing capabilities, which is really nice. A lot of really, really nice cross patching. So that way you don't have to worry about plugging things in the right order. Uh, for like the kids, they don't have to, like, the students, they don't have to plug things in the right order so that it shows up in the right order on your mixer. With a digital mixer, one of the great things is that they can plug it in however they want, and you can just sit there and cross patch the channels so you have all your vibes, all your marimbas, all your soloists, everything laid out very nicely. You can, they have the DCA groups, which is just groups of channels that are sent to other channels. It's like a bus. So a bus is like a channel that other channels feed into, and you can use those for routing, audio processing, things like that. It's just the routing flexibility with a digital mixer is going to be way better than you're going to get with an analog mixer, which is pretty much, you kind of get what you get with an analog mixer. And I definitely, I think it's pretty standard to use digital mixers. I mean, I
Yeah.
wouldn't get one. I wouldn't get an analog mixer if I were
Yeah,
you.
I mean,
Yeah.
just the ability to save scenes
The scenes,
as
yeah,
well.
right.
So that way you're not ever like, well, the electronics are too loud. Well, the
Yeah.
electronics are the same volume they've been every single time. Maybe the winds are playing a little soft here.
Yeah. Or the onboard effects too. But the effects that
Mhm.
digital mixers have are very useful. So I mean, well, I guess it would have to be digital no matter what. Yeah. So yeah, that's useful. As long as the effects aren't garbage. Like you know, I don't like the reverb on the Yamaha TF series. I think it's a bad reverb. That's why I like the Behringer X32, like the Behringer line. I think the X32s are
Mhm.
really, really great. I think they're both good mixers. But I usually recommend my groups get the Behringers. Ooh, one of my groups got a Behringer wing this year, so I get to go whenever this whole thing lifts. I get to go down there and set that up for them. That'll be a lot of
Oh,
fun.
that's awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on that. So that'll be great.
So talking about the process of like all your sound design creation, which I'm sure you've had a lot of different scenarios. What's your process for the creation part of it all?
Usually I get a MIDI file. Um, and I have to work with that, right? Like that makes sense. Like the band doesn't know the music yet; it was just written. So like there's no possible way I can have anything but a MIDI file to work from. The difference, and this is where the sound design thing kind of departs from every other designer's thing. So uh, the arranger is going to write the music, and they'll be like, "Well, I know how it will sound when the kids play it." The drill writer is going to design the drill, and they'll be like, well, I know how it's going to look when the kids march it. The color guard is going to design the flow. I don't know what it's called. I don't know anything about guard, sorry. But they're gonna design all the work for the guard, and they're like, I know how this is going to translate. For me, everything that I do, it doesn't translate. It is what it is, right? So if I design like a bass sound to the MIDI file and then I hear it with the band and it sounds miserable, I don't think that's a comment on um, my ability to anticipate how the band is playing or how it fits with the band. I just think that it's almost impossible in a lot of ways to sort of like get it exactly right without a lot of experience. Like my first few years of doing this stuff, the stuff didn't translate very well. But now, I mean, and I use these Dynaudio speakers in my studio, and I found they translate really well to huge sound systems outside. That's why I really like them. Tested out a whole bunch of speakers, and these ones just won hands down. So these monitors that I use translate really well to the marching field. So my process starts with working with the MIDI files, knowing that I will take this sound, listen to it with the band, and have to make tweaks if I need to. Most of the times nowadays, I don't have to, which is really nice. Most of my groups just take the sounds and use them, and it all works. And but especially like if I show up and I'm listening, and I kind of will, I might make some adjustments after the fact, you know. But I guess that's a little more like large scale answer to the question. I don't really know. Like basically, I kind of will do, there are a few elements that each show needs, right? There's a few basic elements that every single show is going to need. You're going to need impact moments. You're going to need some risers to lead. You're going to need some pads to fill in some stuff, right? These are the basics. I take one big pass through and I do the basics, all right? That's just stuff that I put in there just to make everything a little bit more like flowy, movie, cohesive, impactful, big, right? Then I go back through again, the whole thing. And this time it's much more of a uh, custom creative workflow. What does this exact show need? What does this exact moment need? What's going to set this moment apart from everything else? This is where it starts to become very personalized and very personal for me and very personal for the band's show. And that's my typical workflow. I use a lot of Ableton packs. I use a lot of Contact, which is a fantastic sampler VST. I get all my bands to use Contact as well because I just think that it sounds great. But I mean, there's nothing that sounds as good as Contact and has as much flexibility as it out there right now. I think, especially for the price point, you know. So yeah, I use Contact a lot, and I use a lot of field recordings that I make myself. So obviously, you know, if someone's doing a show about India or something, I can't like pop on over to India and get some like great recordings of a street bazaar or something. So I do like do a lot of scoping out samples online and things, but as often as I can. All the bird chirps that I use in the shows, and there are bird chirps. Everyone wants bird chirps. Lots of bird chirps. A lot of bird chirps in these shows. Not all the time. Depends on the show. But those are all recorded myself for the most part. A lot of them are. Any kind of cicada sounds, or like if there's like a late summer outdoorsy ambiance or whatever, I oftentimes will use, I have this huge pack of sounds that I recorded when I was on tour with SCV when we were in Arkansas, and it was so miserably, horribly humid hot. It was so bad. I have never in my life experienced such heat while standing in shade. It was the worst thing ever. But I had a break, and so we were in some, I don't know where we were. We were not, we were a little off the map at some area, and I ended up wandering around for hours this neighborhood and recording cicadas with the shotgun mic that SC was using for their soloist that year. And so I have this huge pack of like cicada and cricket recordings that I did myself that I use for a lot of stuff. And um, yeah, so it's basically I don't know, like I try and put as much of my own stuff in there as I possibly can because that makes it very unique, you know. And I try and layer things a lot too. Layering is a huge process. So like I don't just throw a pad in. I throw a pad that blends into another pad that blends into another pad that's layered on top of this other sound that and the bottom is filled out with this sound too. If I were to just use a pad, it would sound like a friggin' pad. But if I use all of these sounds, it sounds like more. I don't know. It sounds like more. You know, it's deeper, it's richer, it's totally unique. You know, I don't use the same sounds for multiple people. I don't throw the same pad in like oh well last year I used a pad for this band, so this isn't the same key and tempo. I'm just gonna throw the pad in over here. I don't do that. You know, everything's very very custom for each group. So it takes a lot of time, and I oftentimes find myself hitting my head against the wall, wondering what on earth I'm going to do for that one freaking moment that I can't fill in. But after trying a lot of trial and error, I finally find stuff that works. So yeah, and I like feedback too. I like I every single email I send out, I always ask for feedback. Um, I don't know, most people just kind of go with it for the most part. They're usually like, cool, that's great. But every once in a while, people will say, we'll offer a suggestion. And I like that because they've been sitting there with the band every day for the past 2 months, and I haven't heard the band more than a couple of days in person. They know what it's going to sound like a little better, right? So I think that is, yeah, I think that's an important part of the process is going back and forth and working with people to make sure it sounds right.
Yeah, that's cool. It sounds like you put a lot of care into it. And really, there's just that whole idea of taking, you're on tour. It's not like you've got a ton of resources, but this moment happens where you just like, well, you're in Arkansas and then you hear a ton of cicadas. So you just like borrow the Core's shotgun mic and just go capture it. So, and it's still with you. Like what, was that like 8 years ago?
No, it was 2016,
Oh,
so
okay.
4 years
Not that
ago.
long ago.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I have a lot of older recordings too. Like I've got I use these ones. They're pretty similar sounds, but I used to live in South Carolina, and in right outside of Columbia, there is a swamp, the Congaree Swamp, and I went out there at night one time and just was like wandering around this swamp at night and got a bunch of great recordings of night bugs and insects and owls and stuff. And I have tons and tons and tons of these sounds everywhere. So yeah, I like doing that stuff. I try and record. I record all the time. I try and take a little recorder with me everywhere. And actually, I use my iPhone lately, and that's kind of great. It just the um the iPhone 11 has a microphone that actually is meant for picking up sounds that are in the distance, um, as though it wasn't in the distance. So I use that a lot too, and it's kind of cool. Works out really well.
That's crazy. I honestly did not expect you to say iPhone. I was going to ask, do you just like carry around a recorder or something? And you're like, nope, just my
No,
phone.
my Zoom, I use like a Zoom H4n, and it's a little too big to fit in my pocket. I really want to get a little one, but I also just haven't yet. Making do with what I have right now.
Yeah, yeah, crazy. Okay, so you're looking at a band, you got this MIDI file. Does the orchestration that the band is using, how does that like affect your design? Depending upon maybe instrumentation or yeah, like what would affect, what are some variables here for you?
Well, the first thing is that I don't want to detract from the band, right? Like that's the first thing is that I don't want what I'm doing. Like these sounds can get so oppressive, um, or so over the top. There's a lot of potential to really blow the band away, and that is my first goal is to not do that, right? Like uh, if there like, but my first thought is support, right? My first thought is how can I make this sound better? How can I support this? I'll do a lot of like low end doubling, so the tubas are playing. I'll add a little bit of sub bass to pump up their sound a bit, right? Um, if there are spots that I feel are going to be empty, and here's the trickiest part about it is that the MIDI file does not actually allow me to tell very easily in a lot of cases whether or not it's going to be empty in a spot because the MIDI files always sound loud and full and like right there, right in your face, right there. um, but in the band, everyone is here, right? Like if this is your perspective, this is you're listening here, they're spread out all over the place. So while it might sound loud on the MIDI file, and I think that I can put some sounds in there and not cover things up, I have to try and figure out. I have to also cross-reference the drill. Are these percussionists right up front? And during this drum break, I want to put a pad under this. Are they right up front? Are they way in the back? That's important. Where are they positioned on the field? Oftentimes, I have to figure out like if the woodwinds are playing something over here, I might throw some kind of sound over here to balance them as opposed to just having everything blasting off of one side, right? Um, Looking at the positioning of everyone, like where they are, both 3D and side to side is really important. Um, but it's mainly, like I said at the beginning, it's mainly just like the first thought is how can I enhance this? It's not so much about it is about the arrangement. Obviously, it has to be about the arrangement. And every single decision that I make is based off of what the arrangement's doing at the time. But the question that I ask is, how can I enhance this?
That's cool.
So when
That's
you're
cool.
asking yourself that question, how much do you take the conceptual information from the design into consideration?
You mean like the show concept, like what's the story?
Yeah, yeah.
Very deeply. I mean, that's the whole thing, you know. That's
Mhm.
I think if marching band didn't do stories, I don't know if my career would exist so solidly as it does. Right? Like, I don't think there'd be as much emphasis on sound design and electronics. Sure, we'd be miking stuff. We'd probably be throwing in some booms and impacts and whatnot, but I don't know necessarily it would be as deep as it is right now if there wasn't this storyline. So that's right. Usually, one of the first things I do is a pre-show. Right there, that's it. You know, I'm all about what the story is. I don't just make pretty pads and ambient unless I get asked to. Like I do sometimes get asked, like, we just want a drone. I'm like, oh, I'll make a drone. Yeah, no problem. But usually they want something that sets the scene, and it's an incredibly important for me to make sure that I get that right. You know, I really, really, if the show is going to be about outer space, it's got to be like, we've got to have sounds that instantly put you there, you know, instantly put you there. And then throughout the entire show too, I am always considering this. And I'm always trying to reference back to earlier sounds. So I try and like present a palette in the pre-show, and then every once in a while I'll take a little bit and sprinkle it back in. And you might notice it and you might not, you know. Especially at the ending too. The very end of it, I'll oftentimes, so the pre-show at the beginning, you do the show, and then we have the ending. And I have a soft spot for soft endings. All right. I love when the band just like, boom, they hit. And then the crowd is cheering and no one probably hears it anyway, but I don't care, because what I like to do is I want the band to hit, and I want there to be like 10 to 20 seconds of just like, there it goes, you know, off into the distance. We're getting some flashbacks to the beginning. We're closing it out. We're rounding it out. It's a soft ending, right? The band hits, and then you have a trailing electronic soundscape behind it that just sort of like acts as the credits. You know, the credits are rolling, the sound is going, the audience is clapping. Usually people aren't going to hear it, but it's happening. And I love that. And if people listen to that, then they are going to get little reference points back to earlier parts in the show. I like to kind of reprise the electronics in that way, you know. So that's something that whenever I can, I try and put like a 10-15 second soft ending to a show if it's appropriate, you know.
Yeah, and that's a really nice way to wrap up a story as well. That you don't just have the punchline, but you actually have the end credit scene
Mm-hmm.
happen instead of like boom, we're done.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, most shows are going to end with that big impact, you know. Everyone
Mm-hmm.
wants to end with an impact, and I think that's, I mean, yeah, of course you do, right? Like, that's totally appropriate. um but yeah, just kind of being able to reference back to an earlier part in a very, very, very subtle way is something that I like a lot, you know. So yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we're referencing here some very cinematic things and very cinematic details. And if you guys haven't checked out John's pre-shows or haven't been able to experience any of them, they are just like, you know, to me, they just immediately are sparking imagination. They're just like so artfully done. Never are they just like in your face. They kind of just like comfortably bring you to a different place. And there's nothing like obscene. There's nothing that just like slaps you and you're like, okay, here we go, pre-show. It's just like, it just leaves you trying to anticipate what's coming next. I just like, I'm trying not to fanboy you too here hard, John,
No,
but
no, tell me, I
it's
like it.
but no, it's just like so tasteful. I have to ask, what are some of the processes that you go through? Like, it sounds like the way you're talking about this, you're very cinematic about the whole show. The storyline's very important. Where do you get your influences for doing these pre-show things? Like, what's your creation process for this? Just really just like thinking pre-show here.
Yeah, the pre-show is my favorite part. because
I can
that.
tell.
Oh yeah, oh it's my favorite part. So I'm a composer originally, and actually when I first started my undergrad, I was in music education for the first year, and quickly realized that was not for me. I tried to switch to composition. I don't know why the music education thing didn't catch on with me. I really wanted to be a composer, and after my first quarter in that school, at Ohio University, after my first quarter there, I went and tried to join the composition studio and was just like shut down about it because I wasn't very good at theory at that point. I mean, I hadn't studied it in high school. You know, we didn't have theory classes or anything, and so I basically was told no, and that was it for me. I kind of was like, well, I guess I'm just not going to be a composer, and that was really disappointing. But I went to what I wanted. I also wanted to be a French horn player. I wanted to just make the music, and so I started French horn performance the next year, and just didn't compose anything for years and years and years. And then finally, I left. I mean, you know, I started making beats, like I mentioned in the last episode. I started making some beats, but that wasn't like school oriented. It wasn't until my master's degree or my late undergrad that I started writing some music. And at a certain point, I just kind of realized that my definition of what a composer is was far too narrow before, because the first piece that I ever wrote was this piece called Pocket Derivations. And this was actually kind of crazy because I got some really critical feedback about this that was I loved it. But it was a piece called this all it all works, it all wraps up, trust me. But what I have this tendency to keep receipts in my back pocket, like my back left pocket, and I keep adding them. And then when it's time to do the laundry, I'll empty my pockets and I'll take the wad of receipts and I'll put it in my pocket of the clothes that I'm wearing. And then I like will go ahead and do another laundry cycle a few weeks. I'll take that wad and put it in my pocket again and just keep doing this until I have this like
Wow.
it's so stupid. I don't know why I do it. But I wrote this piece called Pocket Derivations, and the whole goal, I wrote a Maximus P patch that automatically recorded when I started reading something, and it was a quadraphonic audio piece. And then what you do is you open up the program. You're supposed to take a piece of paper, a receipt out of your pocket, read the receipt, and then sit down and stare at the audience while the software runs through its various processes for the next like 10 minutes, and then the piece is done. And that was the first piece I ever premiered. And I went to like a reception party afterwards. And this one dude, this is back when I was in University of New Mexico, and there was this dude from Juarez there, and I went up and talked to him, and he came to me afterwards. He's like, dude, he's like, he's like really really cool piece. Yeah, I mean it's very interesting. He's like, I didn't like it, and I don't think it's music. I was just like, all right, cool. Oh, by the way, I mean, I should say that like it recorded your voice and just manipulated the voice and spun it around the room. That's what the whole thing was. It was your voice recording. You
Yeah, it's
read
like
the receipt and it records your voice. You know.
very John
So
Cage. Yeah,
so
very
yeah,
minimal.
very John. I mean, I was so into John Cage back then. You know, I mean, I very much love the experimental music thing. Don't do it too much anymore. But anyway, that point where that dude said he didn't think it was music was exactly when I was like, that was music. I don't know why. It's just like at that point I realized that like I could just be a composer by just writing pieces of art. You know, doesn't really matter what it is. And that eventually went into me writing film scores and me actually being a composer. You know, like a real composer, real composer, whatever that is. You know, no one's a real composer, and yet everyone is. So this all leads me to say that my favorite part is pre-shows, because what the bands usually do is they say, hey, we need a pre-show. It needs to be 2 minutes long. Okay, bye. And I get to go, you know, like I get the concept and I get to just write, and it's so cool, you know. So that's basically it. I get the concept. I get whether they want it to be able to loop or not. Like if the ending, you know, if I can write it, and then at a certain point it becomes a loop. They can just keep triggering over and over again. I do that like a DTX, but I really mean this triggering over and over again, you know, so that band get set up. I need to know the concept. I need to know tempo, key, whether it should be loopable and the length, and I can just write whatever I want. So that's my favorite part. I don't know if that
Yeah.
answered your question or not, but
Yeah, for sure. No, that's great. Definitely, you're drawing inspirations from a lot of different places there, and it's sweet to hear how you just take like your full musical career and it just you've like applied every ounce of it into what you do now.
Yeah, we are all the sum of our parts, basically.
So if you could leave the listeners with like any quick, easy audio tips and tricks, be it sound design or like implementing how to best use your mixer,
Mhm.
just anything, you know, anything along those lines.
Oh,
Something that somebody could even use today to make their band sound better, whenever we're allowed to see our bands again. But
yeah, right. Okay, here's one. Some of you might think this is obvious. Run your electronics in stereo. You should run your everything in stereo. Run it in stereo. Just do it because
Oh man.
I don't care if the back of your synth says mono on that one little left output, and you can you're like, oh well, I don't need to use as many channels on my mixer. I mean, obviously, if you don't have enough channels, run it in mono. Uh, if you can run it in stereo, definitely do it. But um, the problem with running things in mono as opposed to stereo is that you get a lot of phase cancellation. So what it does is it essentially forces the two stereo stereo image of the audio together. It forces them together into a single mono signal. And when you are overlaying two sides of the audio, that's going to cause the waveforms if a waveform is going up at the same time a waveform is going down, that's going to equal to nothing. Like if they're equal power waveforms, if it goes up from 0 to 1 and this goes from 0 to -1, you're going to hear nothing, okay? Because those waveforms cancel each other out. Now, how this applies in actual, in music, usually you don't get complete cancellation. That would be kind of crazy because there's so many variables. But what it means is that your sound ends up sounding really, really 2D, really two-dimensional, really flat, and you just don't get that. You don't get the richness and the width that you should be getting. And if you're running your electronics in mono right now, like the moment you switch to stereo, you're going to instantly hear that is a huge improvement. um, it it is the number one most common first thing that I do when I get to a new group. When I get to like a new band that I'm working with, um, more often than not, one of the first things I do is I look at everything. I'm like, all right, we're going to need two more channels because you're running these two synths in mono and they need to be in stereo. So that's tip number one. Um, huh. What's some other tips? What as band directors, what would you be curious about knowing? Like, what if you had a question? You know, because it's a very broad question. And I feel like I've been put on the spot, and I'm trying to come up with it, and it's kind of tough.
well, I feel like one question I've gotten a couple times is, a band director's gotten their electronics implemented and whatnot, and their question is, why don't they sound good like the recording I got from so and so, or why do they not sound good coming out of the speakers, but they sound different on the computer when I listen to the MP3?
Yeah. Oftentimes, I found that a lot of people seem to. I think they might be putting effects like EQ and stuff on master channels as opposed to individually EQing sounds. So I've walked into a lot of bands and seen that they've EQ'd their synth sounds on the high end and bumped the high end up a little bit on. I'm like, well, that cool. I'm sure that probably worked for that one sound that you needed that, but now every other sound is going to have too much high end. And the same goes for samples. The same, so you can't just have a global EQ. I do not EQ on the mixer. I make a point of not EQing the synths and the electronics, like any of the electronics, except for adding a 30 hertz low cut or high pass. So I add a very aggressive 30 hertz cut on the low end because well, I'll tell you that. I'll tell you why in a second. This is actually another good point. And I actually thought of another tip. So, but yeah, basically, like you might want to check that you don't have any effects that are globally positioned on anything. Um, Aside from that, it's really a lot of it's a balance game, and a lot of it's the speakers you're listening to. I mean, if you take that MP3 and listen through your sound system and it sounds good, but then you go and play it and it sounds different, that's a problem, right? But if you listen to the MP3 on headphones and then you listen on your sound system and it doesn't sound good, then that's a problem with the actual audio that you have. That's not your system. That's the fact that the audio just isn't right for the system. It's not audio. It's just not right, you know? So that's a good test to do as well. Run the MP3 through the speakers you're actually going to be using them with, and see if that's how you can kind of like figure out whether it's on the gear end or on the actual file end, you know. And then another tip that I got, and I think a lot of groups are mostly doing this, you know, at least groups that have people who work like engineers that work with them, but there's a lot of groups that don't. So I should say this as well. If you're using a subwoofer with your um, with your speakers, then you need to send only sub audio to the subwoofer, which means that anywhere between 100 hertz and 120 hertz, you need to cut out all the high end from your sub, and vice versa, cut out all the low end at that same range on your speakers. Well, like, why would you do this? Because sound is electricity, electricity is energy, right? So basically, your your subwoofer is not meant to reproduce anything but sub audio. However, it's gonna try. And the same way that your other speakers are more meant for a depends on the speakers you have, you know, but generally they're meant for higher end audio. By that I mean higher frequency audio. So, but they're going to try and reproduce the sub frequencies, which is going to take energy away, and it's going to make your speakers not work as efficiently and not sound as good. You can do that on your mixer by taking your main outputs, running them to buses, and whatever it's called on the X32, it's called the matrices, the matrix. You know, there's an actual like sub output on most mixers as well. But whatever that is, you run the main outs for all the audio, or skip your main outs entirely. Take all the audio, run it through buses, and put the EQs on it as like the very last thing that happens before it goes to the outputs of your mixer. That's very important, and pretty much almost every group that I've ever worked with, I've had to do that when I first get there, because it's not intuitive. I mean, you're still going to be getting sound, and it's going to sound just fine, but it sounds better if you do that, and you have more control over how much sub or high end you have too, because all of a sudden what you've done is you've taken this audio and you don't just have a main up down fader, you have a main fader for your sub and a main fader for your high end. It allows you to balance things a little more nicely, you know. So if you get into a big stadium and you want to bump your subs a little more, because that'll make more of an impact in there, things like that. So, and those speakers as well. You want your audio to be louder when you're in a larger space, obviously. You know, if you're playing to a 15 row bleacher row high school stadium, then you probably don't want to be using the settings that you would use at Lucas Oil. But maybe you do. Maybe you hate your audience.
Or you love them, just give it
Or
to
you-
them. No,
You love 'em. Yeah, I suppose it really depends on your view of them. Yeah, so
So you bring up a good point. Let's talk about that, like venue size. When you're in a larger venue or when you're in a smaller venue, how do you adjust? You know, because I would assume that you don't try to adjust every single thing individually, but do you adjust just your matrices? Do you like turn, if you've got powered speakers, are you turning the speakers down and running the mixer at the same level? You know, what are you kind of doing?
um, I mean, I will, yes, I will answer that, but I will also say, if you're using powered speakers, set your levels in your speakers and put tape over them. All right, just like, do not touch those again. And also, it's not to like remind you to not touch them. It's so that your kids don't accidentally bump them, or the parents that are helping move things on. It's just those little knobs in the back, they get bumped, and all of a sudden you're like, why is the right speaker so loud, or why can't I hear the left speaker? You know, and you're like, well, you go behind there, someone accidentally bumped the knob. So the answer to your question is, I'd never ever change what the speakers are set to, because that would be an additional variable, and we're trying to remove variables, right? I only make those adjustments from either the main fader, if you're running everything through your main fader, or from the buses, um, if you want to boost either high or low end. And I do take the highs. I do take the sound up in volume or down depending on the stadium size. So like Lucas Oil Stadium, when my groups go there, um, I'm gonna make sure that for the week before we get in there, we're practicing at higher volumes, and I also make sure the band directors are aware that, hey, look, if you want, you can have like rehearsal volume and stadium volume, and you can just like keep these two different sets together. I don't like doing that. That seems to be like a lot of extra work. Like if you make an adjustment in one, you have to go make the adjustment in the other one, and maybe there's a better way. I just don't do that, so I don't have to. I don't know that way. But I think that the best way to go about it is to just like make one adjustment on the main faders, whatever they are. And usually it's anywhere between 2 to 5 decibels of boost. That's really general. I would not take what I just said right there as like law, because you got to listen and make the
Right.
adjustments yourself. Um, really want to make sure that that, like, I mean, fundamentally you're using your ears. But I will tell band directors, like, hey, this is going to be loud, don't be scared. Okay, like, don't be scared, this is so loud, because you're standing over your band like 20 feet from the speakers on a podium, and this is not where the judges are, this is not where the audience is going to be. This is not anything like a real situation. This is going to be loud, don't get freaked out. Okay, because so often the very first thing that the sound will come through, and it'll be loud, and if it's too loud that you can't rehearse, obviously take it down. That should go without saying. You don't want to like have it be detrimental to rehearsal. But if it's like a little bit too loud, and you're prepping to go to indie, that's I mean, that's kind of part of the game a little bit. And sure, you can actually take it down a little bit for your rehearsal and then bump it up a little bit when you get to the big stadium, or or the Alamo Dome, or anywhere, it doesn't matter. So uh, not just indie. Yeah, only boost things when you're going to Lucas Oil. Only in Lucas Oil. But yeah, so I'm always making these adjustments based on venue size and type.
Do you ever change like your speaker angle based on venues?
Yes, I do. I mostly like to keep the speakers flat to front. I see so many times when bands will have their speakers like cocked in really far, so they're like, hey, we want to point our speakers at the judges. Don't do that. You just don't do that. I mean, you should keep them flat to front, because the sound dispersion goes like a cone. All right. So what's going to be happening is that by the time it gets to the judge anyway, these two cones will have intersected anyway. They're going to get like a nice stereo image. It's not going to sound weird to them because it's not pointed blasting directly at them. Um, Instead, it might sound even weirder if you have the two speakers pointed directly at them, and it's just sort of like blasting the audio across each other like that. Uh, these are very, very subtle things. I don't know if, I mean, anyone would really notice, but it is generally good practice to keep the speakers flat front when you're in a larger stadium or even a medium-sized one. Um, but if you're in smaller stadiums where, you know, you're sitting 20 feet back from the sideline as a judge or something, and the speakers are like way over there and way over there, then yeah, I mean, otherwise, then at that point, you're not going to be at the point where the sound intersects. You're going to be back in here, and it's not going to be the same dispersion. You're going to be able to hear it, obviously, because that's how sound works, but it's not going to be the same effect as if you were further back and in that sound dispersion zone. So in that situation, if it's a smaller stadium, then yes, I say kind of crank the speakers in a little bit. Um, but I mean, if you have a choice to do things with subwoofers, don't worry about that, because subwoofers are they're not directional, so the sound's just going to emanate. So you don't want to point your subs at. I had a oh my gosh, this is so funny. I had a group at one point, and one of the parents accidentally put the sub sideways, on the field, and they got so freaked out about it. Like they were so freaked out about it and upset about it. And I had to be like, no, it's fine. I mean, like it's not ideal, you know, it looks weird, but you're still gonna get subbed. Don't worry about it. You know, it's fine. Don't do it again, you know, but don't, it's not this big of a deal as if you put the speaker the wrong way, you know, that's a whole different thing. So subwoofers are omnidirectional, speakers are directional, but they're not so directional that you got to just like blast people like sniper style with them.
Do you do anything with like vertical angle, like tilting them back? I know a lot of the modern day pageantry carts allow you to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Now in that situation, yeah, I do point the speakers I point them up at the judges. You know, I loft them up a little bit in that case because usually you're trying to get over a wall, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's usually going to be a wall at the edge of the field, so you really want to kind of get up over that. Otherwise, you just, oh man, when we were in Stanford, the Stanford Stadium is the worst for sound because it's got an overhang and the field is approximately this far away from the edge of the it's like it's just so close to this gigantic wall with an overhang. You can't get your speakers to do anything. Even if you were to point them up in the air, like it's just still going to be hitting this overhang. And I was when we were with SCV and doing the Stanford shows, I hated that because it was always just like a horrible echo chamber where you just can't get past this like giant concrete wall. Um, just nothing to be done. But in most cases, you can do something about that. You know, in most cases, you can loft it up a little bit over that wall, point it at the judges. You know, I think that's a good idea. I would point it maybe not like at the judges, like if they're like way up there. You know, maybe split the difference. Like you kind of want the audience to get a good
Right.
too. They're gonna be
Right.
yeah. So
Cool.
yeah.
So, any other last minute tips and tricks that you want to leave our audience with, or thoughts, or
I don't know.
Anything on either marching band, starting your own, like running your own career, anything?
Yeah, actually, I get a
Finding
lot
it
of
easily.
emails every year from sound designers, from like usually people like usually like younger sound designers, people just starting out, asking like how to, you know, like how do you find people to work with, and in situations like that, if you're interested in doing sound design, uh, first of all, I mean you can email me and I can give you some like personal advice too. I'm more than happy to. I always answer those emails. But I always say just start locally. You know, like find groups around you because people really like when you can actually be there. It's sometimes difficult to try and show that you are a knowledgeable individual if you aren't right there in person, right? Like how can you trust someone? So I always say start locally, start getting some schools under your belt, start showing that you can do this, have some schools that you can some files you can present to say like, hey, I did this. This is the quality of my work, things like that. But the main thing would be to and you know like if you're in this world and you know people, ask them. Most people know someone who needs something, right? Like they someone might need excuse me, they might need some sound design or something, and you don't know that until you ask. So I would say reach out to people you know, reach out to me anytime if you want to. I like hearing from people, and reach out to schools. Don't be afraid of reaching out to schools either, because that's basically how I built my whole career. It is really nice. Like the way that I started things, which was going from not doing marching band to being the sound designer for SCV. I don't think that's how most people are going to do it. That was a bit of a unusual situation. So I got a bit of a jump start with that, luckily. But I think that all that really did was open up my eyes to like what was there. And then from that point on, I kind of really forged my way. Um, just like showing the quality of my work and being able to and aggressively reaching out to people, talking to people, not being afraid to ask for help. It is totally okay to ask for help. And I don't know, I think that the whole thing can be a little intimidating sometimes, reaching out to people. It was for me at the beginning. It's just like cold calling or cold emailing or whatever, people that scared the crap out of me. But oftentimes people will be happy to hear from you because, A, they have an option if they need someone, or they know that they're there, or perhaps they are just, the day before they're like, man, I wish I could find a sound designer. And all of a sudden, boop, your email shows up. And I've heard that from a lot of my clients actually, is they think like we need to find a sound designer, and they go to their email the next day, and it's like, hello, I'm a sound designer, and they're like, oh, cool, great. Let me see, talk to them. So, yeah,
I feel like I've been given so much information to stew over for like a very long time here, honestly. Yeah, John, thank
Me
you.
too.
Yeah, right. Hey, thank you so much for getting on this call with us. We are, of course, still doing our social distancing amidst COVID crisis. John is actually from Seattle and still in Seattle right now, while I think Ryan and I are both in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's right?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So thanks again, John. Wonderful to hear from you. Excited to put this out for everybody.
yeah. Thanks so much for having me on. This was awesome. I love talking about this stuff, and it's really nice to chat with you guys.
Yeah. John, why don't you leave us with your website one more time, and any other information you want to give with that?
Yeah. My website is marchingsoundscapes.com. And we didn't mention it in this episode, but we talked a little bit about it in the last episode where just the other day I released an online course called Ableton and Mainstage for the Marching Arts. And that is a course that will take you from not knowing how to use Ableton or Mainstage to being able to integrate it completely within your ensemble and understand what you're doing with it too. So if you're curious about getting started with these DAWs, go ahead and check that course out. If you want to ask me any questions about it, email me. I've got my contact information on my website. And yeah, marchingsoundscapes.com. Go ahead and check it out, and feel free to just say hi if you want.
Cool. Well,
Awesome.
hey,
Well, thank you. Thank you so much again, John, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. As always, hit us with any questions you might have. If you want us to forward any questions along to John, go ahead and shoot those over to us too. And we will see you again in the near future.
on the frontier.